right, quiet. Hello, this is Kevin from thedietwars.com, and here's my lovely assistant, Mia. Say hi, Mia.
Hi.
This is just some kid I picked up off the street, met her 5 minutes ago to include her in my video. She wants to know where her parents are. Where are your parents?
You.
So this video, I'm going to be talking about cognitive function and especially how to maintain it for both combat sports athletes, so especially people involved in striking, but as well as the general population. So these strategies to help protect the brain from injury during combat sports are also generally applicable to overall brain health for people who are not involved in combat sports. So these are the strategies I would use whether or not I was involved in combat sports. And in addition, they're also probably generally useful for heart health and other overall health as well. So if you use these strategies, you are going to reduce the impact of any sort of sports-related injury, but you're also just going to, in general, age better from a cognitive and brain standpoint, even if you're not involved in these activities. She's already bored. She's not even paying attention anymore. But so basically, fighters ask me a lot, how do they protect the brain? And there's one in particular in the UFC that I talk to maybe twice a year. I made a tweet about niacin in particular based on some of the research I've been reading related to a receptor on which I'm doing, or I've been doing much of my PhD project. And it's been shown that in animal models, niacin activates this receptor. This receptor is called GPR109A. It's also called HCAR. And this particular receptor then basically turns off immune cells in the brain after there's an injury. So they'll basically strike mice in the head, right, to induce a brain lesion. And then they'll give animals niacin or some sort of molecule that activates this particular receptor. And niacin is one of the molecules that does it. And then it abrogates it. It drastically reduces the amount of brain injury compared to the mice that are not given the niacin. So the first thing I told this fighter is, hey, niacin's a good idea. Niacin's a good idea for after you're done sparring, take niacin on the basis of these very robust findings in animal studies, which is to say you get struck in the head. If you're a mouse, this drastically reduces the amount of injury, because actually the reason there's so much injury after a brain injury is actually not so much the impact itself, but the inflammatory response to that impact. And the reason for that is that whenever you move back, whenever you please stop moving around. Don't move around. Don't move around. When the brain loses homeostasis, it thinks there might be some sort of infection, and it responds with inflammation. And that inflammation causes further damage. It also protects the brain from perhaps any invading microbes. It's like it's on the ready to protect the brain. And in the brain, and basically the body's thinking it's better to lose a little bit of the brain than it is to like have an infection happen. So it's on the ready. It's a little too alert. It's attacking itself a little bit. It's a little bit of kind of an autoimmune response. And that's the cause of a lot of the brain injury from a strike to the head. And in general, overall, over the long haul, any sort of loss of homeostasis will tend to induce an inflammatory response. So if you can reduce this inflammatory response over the course of aging, you can reduce your cognitive decline because you're reducing the immune system's response to the brain. And in fact, much of the body's chronic diseases are undergirded by this kind of mechanism, this inflammatory mechanism of the body against itself that causes these diseases. And that's not the whole story, but that's part of the story. It's a big part of the story. But for concussions in particular, and for even subconcussive events when you get hit in the head, or just overall everyday life, sleep deprivation, any other sort of stress that causes slight damage to the brain. The inflammatory response is actually in some ways much more important than the inflammatory or dyshomeostatic event itself. Sit still, baby. And if you can't, then just focus on this. So so what you're trying to do, a strategy here for the niacin, whenever I told this particular UFC fighter, hey, take niacin directly after, is to replicate what they were finding in mice. And this has been found in about a dozen now studies, a very consistent effect. Of course, it's just a model. It's like you're using a certain specific thing in a laboratory. It's not the same as being punched in the head repeatedly. So it's a little bit different, but on the basis of this plausibility, given that we don't have any good treatments so far for this kind of thing, we don't have any good preventive measures, what can I tell this person that might have the best chance of helping them out? And it's a niacin. It's a relatively safe thing. It's been used safely for decades. And so there's a good chance that it will reduce the amount of brain inflammation and help combat athletes. So that was the first thing that I told him. But then I also kept brainstorming about this, and because I didn't want to just give him just this one thing. I wanted to try to help him as much as possible, because again, when you're a combat athlete, the potential risk of CTE, that is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, that is basically a brain disorder based on being hit in the head too much, can be high, much higher than in the general population. So you don't want to, we want to do whatever we can to prevent this if we can. It's a terrible thing to happen. So I came up with some other strategies. And again, these strategies will also be useful for anybody who is interested in overall brain health over the long period. And these are the things I use and I'll continue to use even after I'm done being a grappler. And again, I'm not a combat athlete in the sense I don't punch people hard in the head. I don't get punched hard in the head because I don't train hard like that. Whenever I do train striking, I train light. But I do train a little bit, and then sometimes, I might fall. This never happens, but it could happen every once in a while where I could fall pretty hard. And every once in a while I do fall kind of hard, and so maybe that could be a subconcussive event. It could be jarred a little bit. And so this sort of thing gives me a little bit of extra insurance. Now, that is not to say that these sorts of nutritional strategies will necessarily prevent all brain injury. Again, you need to take preventive measures and be very careful with your sparring and be smart in the way that you spar. Don't go 100% each time. Don't think you can go 100% because you're using these things. These things will just help you out during the times whenever you might be a little bit more concerned about having some sort of brain injury. But otherwise, you need to be very careful with the way that you train. And the same goes for the general population. Don't do bunches of all-nighters, which is things I've done. Don't do, don't abuse your brain with alcohol and drugs, et cetera, and think that this is going to protect you. It's just going to add a little bit of extra layer of protection. It's going to probably make your brain age a little bit slower, is my guess. Now, the niacin was the basis for all of this, but I want to give actually a little bit more of a balanced and a long-term sustainable approach. So to say, niacin's great after a sparring session, but you're not going to take niacin every day for brain health. I don't even know if there's any good evidence or good reason to believe that might work. I think it's much more plausible that you could use it directly after a sparring session. But the other strategies I'm going to tell you now are going to be strategies that you can use all the time. What? Password? Sorry. Later. These other strategies are going to be things that you can use all the time. So what would those be? First thing I would say for brain health, long-term brain health, is 5 grams, 3 to 5 grams, 3 at minimum, 3 to 5 grams, let's say closer to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate each day. Creatine is the safest supplement probably that we even know of. The only essential side effect is going to be maybe a little bit of extra weight in terms of water. The water is going to enter your muscles. Your muscles are going to look a little bit bigger For the vast majority of people, that's not an undesired side effect. It's only going to make your body composition look better. But apart from that, it's going to make your athletic performance better, but then it's also going to provide extra energy, sort of an energy pool, it's going to widen or largen or deepen the energy pool in the brain, in the neurons of your brain. And by making this energy pool wider and deeper, any sort of any sort of injury that does happen, I can't. Do you want to go play somewhere else?
No, I'll fine. I'll do it.
Any sort of event that happens, any sort of dyshomeostatic event where your neurons are thrown out of homeostasis. Having an extra energy pool to draw from to maybe survive or to function better for longer is going to be something that's beneficial to the neurons. It's going to keep them alive. That's creatine monohydrate, and there's a good amount of evidence in these same animal models. Again, you strike these animals in the head, you get, after they've had creatine monohydrate, and bigger parts of their brain actually end up surviving. Same thing, but you can use creatine all the time. So I would say that. I would also say that creatine monohydrate in these quantities is achievable from meat. I wouldn't recommend eating meat in order to get creatine monohydrate because there's other downsides of eating this much meat. The average American gets about 1 gram of creatine monohydrate a day. I think the average female gets maybe about 0.8 grams. So men get a little bit more than women because men eat more meat in general, like on average. But it's only about 144 grams of meat per day consumed by the average American. So if you extrapolate that up a little bit higher, we're only talking about maybe 500 grams of meat. Now that's a lot for an American, but for a hunter-gatherer, that might have been consumed during certain periods of time. And also there are certain kinds of meat, for example, herring, and other kinds of wild game that might have very high concentrations of creatine monohydrate. So it's very plausible that for long periods of time among hunter-gatherers, it's part of a normal diet that 3 to 5 grams, especially 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate could have been consumed for long periods of time. So it's not something that you're taking that is sort of unphysiological, that's super physiological, that's much larger, it's kind of drug-like. It's not. It's something that was a part of the normal human diet. It's something that's well within the range of a normal human diet. It's something that many human groups consumed for periods of time, maybe even chronically in some cases, as part of their normal human diet. And we're actually taking in 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate per day. The interesting thing is mice which don't eat meat, they see these same kinds of benefits to the brain, to overall health of consuming creatine monohydrate. And there might also be glycemic benefits as well. So you might actually reduce blood glucose, although that evidence is a little bit more mixed. I think at least in mice that's been shown to be the case. But mice don't eat meat. So even though mice don't eat meat, you still see the same benefits of creatine monohydrate, suggesting that there's something special about creatine monohydrate itself, and it may not even necessarily be because it's part of a certain sort of evolutionary diet, but rather just there's something special and beneficial about creatine monohydrate itself. So that's the context and the background of that particular supplement and why I think it will benefit brain health in the long term. And it may also be why, and this is a finding that's been found a few times, that vegans have a higher incidence of dementia. It's maybe one of the reasons. The absence of creatine. There's other compounds like taurine, which may also be important, and other nutrients that may be important for brain health. So I would say one of the first lines would be chronic supplementation of creatine monohydrate. Everybody should be taking it. Everybody, the entire adult population should be taking 3 grams per day, and I think it should be fortified into the foods, into the next generation of plant-based foods and foods in general. So functional foods, really powerful, protein chips, etc. Creatine monohydrate, creatine should be fortified into those foods, and I'm hoping that in my line of foods that I create, we'll have creatine monohydrate in there. The next compound, I would say, or substance or food, I would say, is going to be very beneficial for brain health. It's going to be blueberries, or any sort of dark colored berries. So cherries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries. I eat a mix of berries. I eat about half a kilogram a day, so 500 grams per day. I think that's a reasonable amount. It's a good bowl of berries every day. And such a bowl of berries has been shown repeatedly in systematic review after systematic review, including one from Cochrane, to improve cognitive function and to delay aging, brain aging. This is probably because of the polyphenol content, but it may just be the overall general impact on the vascular system, which berry supplementation or berry eating reduces many harmful biomarkers like triglycerides, LDL cholesterol, et cetera, that are known to be involved in atherosclerosis. And atherosclerosis is the worst and hardest word in the world for at least for me. Atherosclerosis is something that also affects the brain. So if you reduce atherosclerosis in the whole body, you improve brain health. So heart health is brain health. It's probably one of the main mechanisms by which berries enhance cognition and reduce cognitive aging over time. So say berries are a really great idea as well. And after review, I'll cite a few of those reviews for you. There's one from Scientific Reports from this year called Effect of Berry-Based Supplements and Foods on Cognitive Function, a systematic review. And it shows, the final line of the abstract says, existing evidence concludes that berry-based supplements and foods have beneficial effects on resting brain perfusion, that is to say, basically the blood flowing through the brain, cognitive function, memory performance, executive functioning, processing speed, and attention indices. Wow, that's great. Okay. And another one's called, it's in an MDPI journal called the Molecular Sciences. The title is Effect of Berry Anthocyanins on Cognitive Performance, Vascular Function, and Cardiometabolic Risk Markers, a systematic review of randomized placebo-controlled intervention studies in humans. And anthocyanins are simply the compounds in the berries that make the berries dark. Okay. And it says, the conclusion is, you know what? It's good. Let's go read all of the results. And there's 49 studies included in this review out of a total of 1,197 articles searched through. And the results were significant improvements were observed on memory, while some of the studies also reported effects on attention and psychomotor speed or executive function. Vascular function markers such as brachial artery flow-mediated dilation were also affected, and consistent evidence was provided for the beneficial effects of berry anthocyanins on endothelial function. That is to say, the cells that line the arteries, those are endothelial cells, those cells functioning better. Finally, studies reported improvements on blood pressure, but effects on metabolic risk markers such as carbohydrate and lipid metabolism were less consistent. In conclusion, this review provides evidence for the beneficial effects of berry anthocyanins on cognitive performance as memory improved. Whether observed anthocyanin-induced improvements in vascular function and blood pressure underlie beneficial effects on cognitive performance warrants further study. They're basically saying, are the heart effects? It just went dark on us. Bleh. We can't make it light. Okay, can we still be seen though? Or is it too dark? Oof, we're fine. We're fine, right?
Yeah.
All right. It's basically saying, we don't know exactly if it's mediated through heart health. We don't know if this whole idea of is heart health, brain health, is the correct interpretation, but it may be. That's what it's saying. Here's another study, and it's called Systematic review of the effects of blueberry on cognitive performance as we age, and it's in the journal Gerontology, 2019. And the abstract says, the effect of flavonoid-rich food, such as blueberries, on cognitive function has been subject to a growing amount of research in recent years. Epidemiological, prospective, preclinical, and clinical trials have revealed positive cognitive benefits from flavonoid interventions, particularly in relation to the amelioration of cognitive decline in older adults. This review will specifically consider the existing clinical research from both acute and chronic blueberry interventions on cognition in human subjects. 11 studies were reported, with 4 studies considering blueberry intervention in 7 to 10-year-old children, 4 considering aging 60-plus-year-old adults, and 3 considering adults suffering from mild cognitive impairment. Findings from these studies indicate that cognitive benefits may be found for delayed memory and executive function in children, and for delayed memory, executive function, and psychomotor function in older, healthy, and MCI adults. That is to say, mild cognitive impairment adults. There's less evidence to suggest positive benefits of blueberry intervention on working memory. Recommendations for further research, including dose, used, cognitive tests, and age groups considered or proposed. So it's saying the same thing. Better brain function if you consume these berries. Again, I would say about 500 grams is a good thing. So a big bowl of them, eat a big bowl of berries every day, and you are freaking great. The other thing you can do is fish oil daily, or you can eat fatty fish. An alternative for vegan listeners out there is algae. So there's an algae-based oil that you can buy instead. What is the name of that? It's there's a brand. Let's look it up real quick. Well, there's a bunch of them, but one of the ones I took when I was vegan was called. I'm trying to find the one that I took. What was it called? Ovega? I think it was something like that. I can't even find it now, so maybe not that popular. Or maybe they don't make it anymore. That's interesting. Anyway, look it up. There is some vegan omega-3s, and you're particularly going to look for DHA. That's the main compound that we are most interested in fish oil, DHA. Cool. And again, after sparring or fighting, so I would say take the highest dose tolerated of niacin, and that's going to be nicotinate, not nicotinamide, but nicotinate. And you are going to want to take, or nicotinic acid, and you want to take 1 to 2 grams, the highest dose tolerated. So whatever does not produce flushing, take that. And these recommendations are based on a number of animal studies, again, showing strong brain-preserving effects after severe trauma with promising but inconclusive human evidence in athletes. So there is some supplementation studies, but they're not really rigorous. It's basically, we gave one group this, we gave another group this, but the controls weren't that great. There was no placebo control. But so such evidence would not be strong enough to justify changing most medical guidelines and for inclusion in most medical guidelines. Nonetheless, because of potentially devastating long-term consequences of repeated head trauma, I feel compelled to say something when I'm asked about this. And again, this is also going to be useful for people interested in general aging. Moreover, these compounds are safe and been widely used for decades, centuries, or millennia. In other words, such an approach is not likely to cause harm and may provide substantial, even large benefit for those looking to reduce the risk of brain damage from repeated head trauma or simply have healthier brain aging. This approach is what I would use on myself or loved ones. An addendum, niacin and exogenous ketones might work through a similar mechanism. So I chose niacin because it is more widely available than ketone esters, and evidence is similar. On the other hand, ketone esters, especially those that convert to BHB, that's beta-hydroxybutyrate, might be better tolerated because they don't tend to cause flushing. Your mileage may vary. And I also got a question via DM about creatine and weight cuts. So yes, creatine adds 3 to 5 pounds in water on average. Complete clearance from the muscle may take up to 6 weeks. Therefore, to be safe, stop taking creatine 60 days before you must make weight. So if you're going to make weight, you have to be in a weight class before a fight. Stop taking creatine 60 days before that. That means creatine cannot be used during fight camps or when expected to be called to fight on short notice. Adding creatine to the rehydration protocol would be an excellent idea, and this is what I do in jiu-jitsu. If I'm cutting weights and I'm getting close, I won't take creatine, and then I'll add it back in the day after, like immediately after weigh-ins. I'll drink as much as I can. Adding creatine to the rehydration protocol is an excellent idea. I recommend the maximum amount tolerable spread evenly out over the 24 hours leading to the fight, or however much time you have after weigh-ins before the fight. Experiment with how much can be tolerated during non-fight periods. Start with 25 grams or 50 grams or 100 grams in 24 hours. Do not test this for the first time to 24 hours before the fight. If this is the first time, limit to 25 grams during that period, and always drink plenty of water. Continue supplementing post-fight for 1 to 2 months to optimize brain recovery post-fight. 20 grams per day for the first week, 5 grams per day thereafter. Such limited strategic use of creatine in the 24 hours after weigh-in may enhance physical performance and provide some of the neuroprotective benefits if they exist without compromising the weight cut. Continuing to use 1 to 2 months post-fight may provide support to the brain as it recovers during this critical period. It should be noted that the animal literature indicate that the longer the creatine supplementation continues, the more it can protect the brain. So having creatine on board as early as possible is optimal. However, if creatine is neuroprotective, as these early data indicate that it could be, then 24 hours of creatine pre-fight is better than no creatine at all pre-fight. So that would be my advice to combat athletes, or maybe to anybody expecting any sort of potential brain trauma in any kind of situation. Soldiers, I think it's not a bad idea. And this is what I would do. So that is that. It's science-based. It's not based on the latest, greatest randomized controlled trials, although the Barry recommendations are. The Barry recommendations are robust and I think would make many medical guidelines on this particular issue. But the other ones are a little more obscure and less certain at this point, although I think some of them will be borne out. A caveat, a note, something very important to remember is that if you are taking DHA for the anti-inflammatory effects, that is to say, you're taking the fish oil for anti-inflammatory effects, limiting the intake of other oils is a good idea. So limiting canola oil, limiting soybean oil, etc. These oils are not inflammatory. Anybody who says that they are, there's people who say that they are, and those people don't know what they're talking about, or they're charlatans. These oils are not inflammatory. However, there's good evidence that they interfere with the anti-inflammatory effects of omega-3s if you're looking for those. So omega-3s reduce inflammation. Omega-6s don't increase inflammation, but will interfere with the anti-inflammatory effects of the DHA or the fish oil. So for that reason, I would not recommend consuming most other kinds of oils during this period, and probably in general, maybe even most other added fats. Things like olive oil, avocado oil, avocados, those are a great idea, but maybe limit the soybean oil, the corn oil, sunflower oil, etc. So that is that. That is my video about brain health, how you can maximize brain health both as an athlete or, as I said, maybe a soldier, or if in general you're looking to do something to make your brain and heart work better over the long period. These are some good, healthy approaches to take. They are low risk and high reward, potentially, and each of these compounds is a very powerful safety profile, and some of them will certainly impact positively ultimately health in the longer term as well. And some of the others have the strong possibility of enhancing health too. So without further ado, thanks for watching. You can find me on thedietwars.com. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. You can find me now as a podcast under The Kevin Bass Show. It should be on Spotify, Stitcher, et cetera, wherever you can download the podcast. If you are having trouble finding me on a podcast, please, or on the platforms that list podcasts, please drop a comment and let me know so that I can make sure that I'm on that platform now. And please leave your comments, ask questions, let me know what you think about this content, any other content that I should do. It helps promote my videos and is a way that you can support me by leaving comments. Also share, subscribe, like, etc. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope you guys have a good day. We're going to go to sleep. Say good night.
Good night.